Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us again, JAG University. I'm here with Brett Mortiz from Peckar Abramson. This is our third segment. We've done together a lot of hard-hitting contractor content, and today we're going to talk a little bit about, from the point of view of a GC, you're hiring subcontractors for a job. What are some of the roadblocks? What are the things to look out for? And how can you make sure that you're doing everything you can to protect your business and to protect your project?
Sure, no, exactly. Thank you, Kevin, for having me. I think that's a great topic to delve into. One of the things for, ensuring that you're hiring a reputable and proficient subcontractor is to engage, subcontractor performance bonds. Essentially, there's kind of two sides of the coin. You guys handle the insurance side. There's also the surety performance bond side, which essentially, is an instrument that requires the subcontractor to perform their obligations, via a surety company as opposed to an insurance company. So it's similar, but at the same time, the surety has different obligations and requirements, but it's a great product that you can use if you're a general contractor to ensure that, say, hey, if that subcontractor defaults and walks away, you have a surety company, a very large, typically also an insurance company, that's willing to step in under certain circumstances and finish that project for you.
Yeah, and it's great because there's multiple types of risk, right? The risk we talk about here most of the time is risk of a claim, of damage, of loss, of an injury, but there's also that risk of non-performance, which, that might even worry you more.
No, it's definitely something that will worry you, especially, operating as a general contractor. If it's, say, a finishing a drywall sub and they walk away, you're a month before you're trying to get your certificate of occupancy. You have an owner that's pressing on you to get a job done. You need that scope of work finished and you need it done quickly. So that's something where, a subcontractor performance bond can really help. There's also, a subguard insurance policy, which I know you know about, which is another, tool that you can use to ensure that the subcontractor performs its work. So there are definitely mechanisms out there for general contractors to use, and they should be aware, honestly, of all of them, because you never know which one is going to pick up. It's not a sure thing that surety company is going to come in and take up the job. So you really want to make sure that your risk is spread out appropriately.
Yeah. And, okay, so, the bigger GCs tend to have this pretty figured out and played out by now. But let's say I'm a smaller GC and building up my business and I'm starting to hire subcontractors. Sure. And maybe at first I don't have a contract. I'm just kind of hiring them and bringing them to the job site. And now I want to visit that. What are some things I should look for in that contract? What's kind of important when I'm building out my agreements with my subs?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great point. The bigger guys do have it figured out. For the smaller guys, step number one, get a written contract. You have to have that. And there's a few key provisions that you're going to need in there. First and foremost, I think you need to make sure that it mirrors the general contract, the prime contract, as it's also called, with the owner. Because if you have differing obligations and things like that, it's going to be a nightmare to try to enforce that and make sure your project's completed. Another thing that's very important is to make sure that you have indemnity provisions. Indemnity essentially says that the subcontractor will reimburse you, the general contractor, in the event that there's damages and failure of the subcontractor to perform its work. Essentially is another risk shifting mechanism from the general contractor to the subcontractor. And that's a very important provision as well. And then, in terms of, everybody's always worried about, payment, right? They want to make sure that they get paid. Having a payment provision in the subcontract that essentially states that, the subcontractor gets paid when and if the general contractor gets paid is essential. Because you as the general contractor in that, kind of middle position where you have an owner who may or may not be paying you, and then you have a sub who's demanding payment for work that they've already done. And if you have this pay if paid provision, typically, if it's written correctly, then you have a situation where the GC can say, listen, I haven't been paid by this owner. I can't pay you, and I don't have to pay you under the subcontract. So based upon that, you need to keep doing your work, and we'll figure it out, and we're all working together as a team. I think that that's essential.
Yeah, and all of it makes sense. Offloading risk is huge, and especially on the insurance side, we kind of do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And what we see is, when we're dealing with GCs and subs, the type of project has a very big bearing on the insurance as far as the way it makes sense for it to be written, essentially.
Correct.
And where I see the biggest amount of confusion, where I see a lot of the essentially risk in insuring a contractor or in building in general would be in large multifamily new construction. Typically over 15 to 20 units in a single development, whether it be tract homes, townhomes, condos. What you have here is you have class action suit exposure. The units get offloaded, the developer sells them all to a bunch of individual unit owners. Few years go by, and in our prior segment we discussed that 10-year plus maybe 1 or 2 year statute of limitations where they could file a construction defect claim. Year 5 or 6, they notice something's up with the stucco siding. Year 5 or 6, they notice something up with the plumbing. They can get together. They could sue you.
And it happens all the time, especially in condo buildings, because not to delve into it too much, but there's essentially what's called a turnover process. So the building turns over from that original developer now to the board of directors, who are, individual unit owners. There's a specified period of time when that happens, but that's when you see all these lawsuits come out, when the unit owners now own this building and say, hey, there is stucco falling down. We got cracks in our garage and things like that. There's water coming down from certain pipes. That's where you have the most exposure. And that's, we talked about this, Kevin, previously, but that's where the RAP policies really come into play.
Yeah.
That's why they're so important to handle situations like this.
Exactly, because let's say you're the GC and then you hear the stucco, well, I didn't do that. This subcontractor did it. Or the plumbing, well, I didn't do that. XYZ Plumbing did it. Okay, but take a look at their policy. It's very common that, well, if they're even still around.
Exactly, I was just going to say that.
If the company exists, if they still have insurance, that's number one. But number two, let's say they do. Check out the general liability policy. Almost all general liability policies for contractors will have a limitation on projects above a certain number of units on the residential side. It might be 15, it might be 20, which essentially invalidates coverage for a large multi-unit residential development.
Yes.
There's one way to write it, and there's one way to make sure that all your subs have insurance, and that's on a RAP policy. Everyone's brought together under one policy. You have full protection through the 10 years. And essentially, it's part of the bidding process where all your subs are buying into that policy for protection on your project. And that removes any shadow of doubt. What if that one plumber's policy lapsed after you checked their certificate when that pipe was installed, or what have you, or the company's gone, or there's so many things that can go wrong, not even naming the exclusion that they probably all have, that really the only way to cover that project would be on a RAP or a very robust project-specific policy. And that's another way to kind of offload risk. You're not depending on other policies to protect you, because the developer, the GC, you're going to be around, but the other people might not be.
Exactly.
And then you also have the administration side. You have third-party people that help you keep everything straight, sign everybody up, and provide risk management. It's the way to go on new residential development. But just kind of circling back here, it seems like if you're a GC, you're hiring subs, step one, have a good subcontract agreement, have a good contract, make sure it mirrors the jobs contract.
Very important.
You have performance bonds, you have subguard. Those are ways to help, just to guarantee that the work is performed, if there's some kind of mechanism to help compensate or reimburse if it's not. And then to know the type of project you have. If you have a large residential project, you need something special. Anytime you have a bigger project, you need to get in depth. You need to speak with your attorneys, you need to speak with your insurance agent and make sure that your coverage is adequate and tailored for this type of project. But before we close out, do you have any other final notes?
It's all about shifting risk at the end of the day, Kevin. Everything we just talked about here, it's risk of payment, risk of performance. It's all about shifting risk. And that's why you hire professionals, and that's why we're here, to help shift risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And then something just popped into mind. So we were closing out, but I just realized too, if you're a builder, you have 10-year tail, that's all your projects. Mm-hmm. Let's say you build a new building every single year. How many overlapping 10-year waiting periods do you have at one time? Any given year, you might have 3 or 4 suits come at the same time.
Yes, it becomes sometimes a barrage for people, and this is something that really affects insurance brokers, because they will just get all of these claims, and the contractor, rightfully so, says, listen, you need to figure this out. I don't know when it occurred. It occurred. That's all that matters to me.
Yeah.
You're my insurance. You guys need to jump on this. But no, that's a great point, Kevin, that yes, sometimes there can be multiple suits, and then you're trying to figure out which year applies which coverage period, and it becomes very difficult to not only do that, but hey, remember, you're a contractor. You're not a lawyer. You don't just have lawsuits. This is not your method of business. You're trying to get out there and finish projects, but you have 3 new lawsuits come in. That's not something you want.
Exactly. If you're going to be a successful contractor, a successful builder, you're going to keep building buildings. You're going to keep completing projects. Do the work on the front so that your growth isn't going to get stifled by all these problems.
Completely agree.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brett. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kevin.
That's a wrap.